Around 1200 BC, something happened that historians still can't fully explain. Not one empire collapsed. Almost all of them did. At roughly the same time, within just a few decades, the great civilizations of the Mediterranean and Near East simply stopped functioning. Cities burned, writing disappeared, trade networks vanished. This was 1,000 years before Rome even existed. And honestly, in some ways, it's a stranger mystery than anything we've covered so far. I'm Arjo, and this is Empires Undone. Let's find out. Before we get to the collapse, you need to understand how advanced this world actually was, and because it was nothing like the primitive, ancient world you might be picturing. The Late Bronze Age was home to a genuinely sophisticated, interconnected network of civilizations. Mycenaean Greece, with its massive fortified palaces. The Hittite Empire, a major power across Anatolia. New Kingdom Egypt at one of its strongest points. And a web of smaller kingdoms across the Near East, all trading, writing diplomatic letters to each other, and forming alliances. These weren't isolated tribes. They were running what was, for the time, a remarkably globalized system, which is exactly what makes this story so unsettling. This was a world that looked stable, sophisticated, and permanent. And then within about 50 years, almost all of it was gone. Theory 1. The Mysterious Sea Peoples. The first major clue comes from Egypt, one of the few civilizations that survived this period, even if badly weakened. Egyptian temple carvings describe waves of attackers arriving by sea, a confederation of raiders. Historians now call the Sea Peoples. These records describe naval battles, burned cities, and entire populations on the move. Here's the strange part. Thousands of years later, we still don't know exactly who the Sea Peoples actually were. Were they a specific group of invaders? Refugees from collapsing kingdoms? Turned raiders out of desperation? Multiple unrelated groups lumped together by Egyptian scribes? Historians genuinely disagree. What we do know is that cities across the region, from Anatolia down through the Levant, were destroyed around this exact time. Something was moving through this world, burning as it went. Theory 2, climate change and famine. But raiders alone don't usually bring down an entire interconnected world. So modern researchers went looking for a deeper cause and found one hiding in the dirt. Pollen samples and climate records from this period point to a severe, prolonged drought across the eastern Mediterranean right before the collapse began. Crops failed, food stores ran out, and when people are starving, they don't just sit and wait. Some historians now believe the Sea Peoples weren't necessarily foreign invaders at all. They may have partly been displaced populations from collapsing kingdoms, forced to migrate and raid simply to survive. In other words, the climate crisis may not have been separate from the invasions. It may have caused them. Theory 3. A fragile, overconnected system. Here's the theory that ties it all together. And it's the one that should sound uncomfortably familiar. Bronze, the defining material of this entire era, requires both copper and tin. The problem is tin was rare and had to be traded over enormous. This meant every single one of these civilizations depended on long, fragile trade networks just to keep functioning. When war and famine started disrupting those networks, it didn't just hurt one kingdom, it broke the entire interconnected system at once. No single cause toppled the Bronze Age world. It was famine, migration, war, and broken trade routes, all feeding into each other, all at the same time. A network this interconnected wasn't just strong, it was also fragile in a way nobody could see until it broke. Here's where this story actually differs from every other collapse we've covered. Rome transformed into Byzantium. The USSR split into 15 new countries almost overnight. But the Bronze Age collapse led to something much darker, a genuine Dark Age. In Greece, writing itself was lost for centuries. Populations shrank. Palaces were abandoned and never rebuilt. But out of that long silence, something new eventually emerged. The societies that rose from this collapse became the foundation of the classical world we actually study today. Early Greece, the Phoenicians spreading their alphabet across the Mediterranean, and eventually the Iron Age civilizations that followed. It took centuries longer than Rome's transformation or the USSR's breakup. But even the deepest, darkest collapse in ancient history eventually gave way to something new. Invasion, climate collapse, a fragile, overconnected trade network that broke all at once. 3,000 years later, historians still debate exactly how much each one mattered, and that's honestly part of what makes this story so fascinating. Even a sophisticated, interconnected world isn't safe from total systemic collapse. That's a lesson worth remembering, then and now. Next time on Empires Undone, we're heading back to the Cold War for a closer look at one of its most dangerous moments. Subscribe so you don't miss it. I'll see you in the next video.